Okay, so welcome back. This is the overview video for the Joshua Bell Virtual Violin Part 2. And in this video, we're going to talk about all of the pages, starting with the character page. The character page will give you variations on the tone of the violin, and it will let you also put the violin into a virtual space. Let's give it a quick listen. That is the concert hall. Here we go. We're going to scroll through these guys. Cathedral. So those are the spaces. Let's listen quickly to the different tones you can get. You get the idea. While we're talking about character, I could also say, just for the record, that we have reverb here on the lower right, and that controls the amount of reverb. And you'll notice that as you scroll through the different pages, this bottom stuff stays the same. So it's kind of the foundation for the instrument. So let's give a quick listen. That's a really wet sound. Many people have been requesting a dry sound too, so let's play a little while with a totally dry sound so you can hear what the samples sound like. There's also poly mode, and I'm going to devote an entire video just to polyphonic playing, but it's worth mentioning here that when you turn poly mode on, you're getting polyphonic legato, and depending on the way you play it, you can make these amazing and beautiful polyphonic lines. So let's just play for a moment like that. I love polyphonic mode. The voice leading is really nice, and if you could learn to play with the right kind of sticky fingers, you can just basically have a studio section of violins at your disposal all at once. All right, so let's talk about the intuition page. This page has 7 really advanced randomization and humanization techniques, and I'll just go through each one of them. So the first one is called slur and bow variants. And what this does, basically, it moves between bow and slur automatically. So it's not something that you need to do on your own with key switches. So when this is on, you can move between the likelihood of bow versus slur. The default is kind of our favorite setting. It's about 60% bow. That means 60% of the time, the direction of the bow will change, and 40% of the time will be a slur, a smoother articulation. It's worth noting, too, that when you hold down the key switch for either slur or bow, that will take precedence over this setting. So if you want to override it momentarily, if you have a specific passage that you want to be slur or bow, that's the way to do it. And that kind of applies for all these as well, especially for the next one, vibrato versus non-vibrato variants. So we sampled Josh playing vibrato sustains and legato and non-vibrato sustains and legato. And so we have that beautiful natural vibrato, which we really highlight in this instrument because it's kind of the heart and soul of his sound. So here is where you can alternate between vibrato and non-vibrato. Right now it's set to about 32% non-vibrato. So that means about 70% of the samples will have Josh's natural vibrato, and 32% of them will be totally non-vibrato. So if you move the vibrato slider here, you can momentarily override the intuition setting. And there's a whole discussion on vibrato that I will save for an additional video, but it's worth taking a pause from intuition just momentarily and talk about the way vibrato works in this instrument. Basically, we found a way to integrate the natural vibrato samples with non-vibrato samples and also have a hybrid scripted vibrato in between. So that's kind of the best of both worlds, in our opinion, because you can have a non-vibrato sample and so if you start a sample non-vibrato and you slowly move up, you are going to hear our scripted vibrato, and it will gradually get more and more pronounced. If you start the slider more than halfway up, you are going to hear Josh's natural vibrato. And from that natural vibrato, you cannot go back. So if you start with a non-vibrato sample, you can move the slider all the way up, and you'll hear vibrato increase, and move the slider back down, and the scripted vibrato will decrease. But once you start with a natural vibrato sample, that you can't slide back from that to non-vibrato. So let's give it a quick little play. I should note, too, that even though you can't remove the natural vibrato from the sample once you've started that sample, you can do a natural rebow. And if you do that rebow, it could be on a non-vibrato sample, and that's a great way to get back to a non-vibrato situation if that's what you're needing to do in your music. All right, so that was a random aside. Let's talk about constant dynamic movement. So this instrument has an LFO running in the background that you can change the rate of and the height of. So if you bring this thing to the max, what you're going to hear is a huge natural increase and decrease in dynamics. And so on. So at a subtle level, this is a really nice way of keeping an ebb and flow to the dynamics, especially if you have a tendency in your performance to forget to ride the dynamics all the time, because violin is such a living, breathing instrument. It's if you remain stagnant for too long dynamically, it's it loses its magic. So this is a way to keep a little bit of an ebb and flow to the dynamics. Let's listen to a more subtle setting there. What about 20%? Let's make the rate about 5 seconds. All right, so the next 3 settings are a huge key to getting the instrument to sound more realistic. There's attack pitch instability, speed pitch instability, and interval pitch instability. So the attack pitch instability, as you might imagine, just refers to that initiation of the note. And so the higher this setting, the more varied the pitch of the attack will be. We found that 50% is a really good spot for that. So basically, the note starts slightly off pitch and then it settles on pitch. And look, we could hear what that effect does by bringing it all the way up to the top. It's still even a pretty subtle effect at the very top. And what we were trying to recreate was when a violinist their fingers are slightly off, there's a natural tendency to just settle onto the right pitch very quickly. Speed pitch instability is probably my favorite intuition control, and that's the key to making runs sound more realistic, because it's almost impossible for a violinist playing an extremely fast run to stay completely in tune with every single little note. So if there's a series of very fast notes, a really rapid scale, the speed pitch instability will kick in and just make sure it's not totally in tune. It'll just bring it off a little bit. Let's give it a listen. Let's bring that setting all the way to the top. You can hear at that highest setting, it's really pronounced. So our favorite little spot for that is at about 42%. The last level of pitch instability is interval pitch instability, and that just is a pretty simple one. The larger the interval, the more likely that it will be momentarily out of tune. We didn't create any more complex a rule than that. So the larger the interval, the more likely that it'll be slightly out of tune. Finally, we have multi-stop attacks, and it's worth drawing a distinction between multi-stop attacks and polyphony here. So multi-stop attacks only applies to a single attack. So when you enable multi-stop attacks, the first time you play on the keyboard, if you're playing sustains, you can play a chord. But then the very next note that you play, especially if it's a legato transition, so if you're playing kind of with an overlapped style with your fingers, will go back to being monophonic. So a multi-stop attack would allow you to play a single chord, and then it will transition immediately after that to a monophonic melody. These little numbers to the right here, 1-2, 2-1, 2-2, and 1-1-2, when you select these, it will split the chord that you're playing in that way. So if you're playing a chord with 3 notes, 1-2 means it will start on 1 note and then transition to the 2 notes. 2-1 is just the opposite. And then 2-2 and 1-1-2 are different schemes meant for 4-note chords. And by default, these are off. But if that is working for the style that you're writing for, by all means, give it a try. And the speed here will change the speed of the split. So before we were hearing ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. If you bring that speed up, it'll give it more time in between the notes. So let's try 200 milliseconds. It's a little bit slower now. All right, so now we're going to talk about the advanced settings page. We'll start with disable legato. Disable legato does a couple things. The first thing it does is if you're having RAM issues, because the main version of the Joshua Bell Violin takes up 1.5 gigabytes of RAM, you could basically purge all of those transitions, legato transitions, from RAM. So turning that off will bring the instrument down to something like 300 megabytes, which is pretty amazing. You're also going to have a totally different sound. So let's try it. We'll turn disable legato on here and listen to what the instrument sounds like. All right, we'll turn it back on. All right, so this is what the instrument sounds like with legato samples. Release samples. This instrument features a whole set of release samples depending on your dynamic. So when you release the key, you will hear Josh actually releasing his violin. You could turn those off if you don't want them. The remove pits resonance is really interesting, and I highly suggest you listen to the difference with remove pits resonance on and off. But basically, the violin has a natural tendency to resonate at the open strings. So if you're playing a pits articulation, if you're playing a note high up on the neck of the violin, you're going to be hearing the open G, D, and A strings ringing out. So what we did is we went through all the samples and we kind of restrained that resonance so that you can have more focus on the note. So if you want the natural sound of those open strings resonating, just make sure that that remove pits resonance is turned off. By default, it's turned on. Round robin. So this instrument varies between 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, and 16 times round robin, depending on the articulation. You can choose to turn those off so that there is no round robin. You can sequence them so that they will go in their natural sequence. So it can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the case that it's 4x. Or you could randomize it so that you don't pick up any patterns in the round robin sequence. Let's listen to that for a second. So you can hear that this is 8x round robin. Let's listen with round robin off. You can hear that the sample is repeating over and over again, and then when it's randomized, oh, that's kind of nice. You don't pick up on the pattern the same way, and I would say it's subtly more realistic. Vibrato speed is pretty self-explanatory. So you could assign vibrato amount and vibrato speed to the same control, but right now most of them have vibrato speed and vibrato amount separated. This dynamics table is worth discussing for a moment. So all of the samples have been brought to roughly the same volume level, and what that allows you to do is to increase and decrease the range of the entire instrument from one location. With the range knob all the way down, the volume is basically going to be the same from piano to forte. Give it a listen. So with the range all the way down, it's kind of cool. You are hearing just the timbral differences from one dynamic to another. And then as you bring the range up, what's happening is the quiet side of the instrument is getting quieter and quieter, and the loud side of the instrument is remaining the same. So it's increasing the volume range from bottom to top. Check it out. So this is with a pretty extreme range setting. Finally, on the advanced setting page, you see this Intuition global lag window. And this one's kind of hard to describe. And it would make more sense once you know a little bit more about the control page of the instrument. But basically, there is a small delay inherent in the instrument when you perform it. And certain elements behind the scenes are happening to decide what is happening articulation-wise with the instrument. So finally, I'll just give a very brief overview of what the control page does. There will be a dedicated video describing all of the ins and outs here because it is one of the most complex things that we've ever done. So our goal for this was for everyone to have a chance to assign all of the articulations to whatever control they want. So whatever your setup is, if you like to control articulations with key switches or with CCs or with aftertouch or the pitch bend, however you like to control dynamics and staccato and all of these things, you can assign every aspect of the instrument yourself. So for those who really want to tweak the instrument in detail, they can do that here. For most of us, we just want to be able to open the instrument and enjoy it. So what we've done is create presets. So if you have a really nice controller and you're utilizing a bunch of different CCs, there's a setting for that, Pro Controller preset. If you have a really simple keyboard and you don't have access to a whole lot of CCs, this is a preset that we would think you might like. There's also a preset that has intuitive shorts that uses a new technique we implemented in the instrument called quick release. And so what quick release does, it lets you play staccatos and spiccatos and ricochets just by playing a short note. And then finally, we made another control scheme called Master Mod Wheel, which assigns a lot of the important stuff like vibrato amount and long dynamics and vibrato speed, I think, as well, to the mod wheel. And so if you have access to just one CC1, the mod wheel, then you might want to check this one out. And then there are two slots in which you can make your own custom presets as well. And I guess the last thing I'll say about the control page, you could play around with this extremely advanced menu of articulations and assignments. And you could also rest assured that if you mess things up so bad and the instrument doesn't work anymore, you can go up here and click the reset button and it will go back to the default state for that particular preset. So if I change all this stuff in a way that really breaks the instrument and it's no longer sounding right, all you got to do is click reset and it'll be totally good to go again. All right, so I think we got through the basic elements of this instrument. I hope that you enjoyed checking this thing out. It's been 2 crazy years of development for us. We will have a more detailed series that will dive in to each page, especially the control page. There's so much going on there, so there's going to be a video devoted just to the control page. But for now, we wanted to give you just a nice overview of the instrument so you can get a sense for what you could do with it. Feel free to send any questions over our way. We'll put our email address on the screen. And thanks again for watching.